Alright, so now that we've finished up writing the code for our rectangle class and that rectangle demo where we could test out this rectangle class by constructing an object and calling a couple of methods on that object, I want to take a moment to kind of step back from this implementation to look at the part of the process of actually writing this code that typically comes just before you actually start to implement or write the program in a text editor or an IDE. So usually what comes just before that is what we would consider to be the design process, where you take the time to kind of plot out the different variables and methods that you're going to need so that you have a pretty good idea or some kind of plan of action that you're going to take so that you know what it is that you're going to be writing before you've actually started writing it. So you could kind of think of it like an outline for maybe a paper, or a much larger case for an entire book. So in this design phase, when we're dealing with classes, one of the major things that we want to be able to do is be able to put together a kind of diagram that's going to show us precisely which classes we intend to use in our programs, what kinds of fields those classes will consist of, and also what kinds of methods those classes are going to be using. And what this is known as is the UML, or Universal Modeling Language, class diagram. So we've got a rectangle class right here. We have our length and width, these two fields that we put into it. The main reason that we knew that we wanted these two fields is because every rectangle needs a length and a width. Those are just standard characteristics or properties of a rectangle. We then decided that we wanted these get length and set length or get width and set width as well, because of the fact that we wanted to be able to access and modify these two different fields. We knew that this was going to be something we wanted to do. And we also included this get area right here at the bottom, because we knew that we also wanted to be able to get one of these other characteristics about a rectangle, the area of that rectangle, based on the length and width fields. So of course, naturally, if we think about this, we could include other methods. So besides just get area, we could have another one to get the perimeter of the rectangle, where we would essentially just be checking the length times 2 plus the width times 2 to just kind of add up all four sides. So we could include a method like that as well. Won't worry too much about doing that. But the main thing that you want to focus on here is, why is it that you would consider including a method like that? So the primary idea here is that whenever you're building out a program, the end user is going to have some kind of requirements about what they want that program to be able to do, and you need to be able to kind of plot that out before you start writing the program. Otherwise, you're going to implement this program that does a whole bunch of really cool things, but it's not really what the user wanted, so it's all kind of just worthless to them. So we're going to take a look at one specific part of this design phase, which is going to be building out this UML class diagram. So these UML class diagrams are going to be part of our design process to provide a clear representation of a class. So we can see a completed one right here already. I'm going to take a moment to step through each one of the different components of this. But just looking at it right now, we can see we've got the name of the class, rectangle. You can see the two fields, the length and width, and you can see all of the methods we put in. So we've got things like set length, set width, get width, and get area. So all of that matches up with what we saw in the code that we wrote for this class. So let's take a moment to kind of break down each one of these three major components. So the first one is pretty straightforward. It's simply going to be the name of the class. So at the very top of one of these pieces in your diagram, so one of these boxes that we have, we're just going to go ahead and list off which class that particular box is meant to represent. So in this case, we've put in the rectangle class. So since we're talking about the rectangle class, we have a particular standard for how we name our classes. We want to make sure that this name right here matches that standard, which is to say that the R should be capitalized. So this is kept distinct from, say, any of your regular variables that you put in, where you wouldn't necessarily do this. It's kind of that distinction between Pascal case and camel case. So standard practices for how you write these different names. So we're going to have this in the first box. In the next part, the second section is going to be the fields of the class. This one's going to consist of a few different pieces. So the very first thing that we're going to see is that little dash, or kind of a minus character at the beginning. That character at the start of each line is going to indicate that these have private access. So whenever we want to specify that something is private, we're going to put that little dash character at the front of either a field or a method. Then from there, we're going to go ahead and actually construct the field. So fields in a UML class diagram are going to be listed in the form of the name. So as you can see, the names are here, length and width. We then put a colon, and then after the colon, we're going to put the data type for those fields. So in this case, we're going to specify that we have a field called length. It's going to have a data type of double. We then have a field called width, and that's also going to have a data type of double. And then finally, in the third section, we're going to have the different methods of the class. So the character at the start of each line here, we see this plus sign that we have, that's going to indicate public access. So this is telling us that things like set length, set width, get width, and get area, these are all going to be public. So this makes sense. We want to make sure that all of our fields are private and all of our methods are public in order to adhere to proper data hiding. There will be possibly a few rare cases where you might make some methods private, maybe if one method uses another in some way. But other than special cases like that, typically all of your methods are going to be public. There's not really any situation where you'd make your fields public that would be all that reasonable, so we're not going to worry too much about that. So from here, we see that we've got our public access. Methods are going to be listed in the form of the name, and then the pair of parentheses, and then a colon, and then at the end of it, so the thing that comes after the colon, is going to be the return type for the method. So we can see right here for set length and set width, we have void, and then for get length, get width, and get area, those are all going to be double. So if we take a look real quick at the code that we have, so we'll come back over to NetBeans. So that's going to match up with this return type right here. So we've got for get length and get width and get area, they all have that return type of double. And then for set length and set width, they have that return type of void. So that's the thing that we're going to specify at the very end of each of those lines. And then in addition to all of that, we're going to have inside of the parentheses, we'll have whatever parameters those methods have. So in this case, they're going to be specified in kind of the same way that we see the fields of the class. So we'll start with get length, get width, get area. Those don't have any parameters, so we just have the empty pair of parentheses. For set length and set width, these have a single parameter. So we're going to see right here, we've got the name of it. So that's going to match up with the name that you would want to use in your actual code. So in this case, it's going to be len and wid, those kind of shorthanded names that are used. And then after that, we're going to have the colon and then the data type for them. So you can see right here for these two parameters that they kind of match up with the general structure of the fields that we use right here. So the end result, once you've done all this, is that you'll have your complete UML class diagram. You've got your name, your fields, and your methods. And then based on this, you'll go ahead and actually start writing out the code for this class. But there's a little bit of a catch. So we can see the name of the class. So that tells us what we're going to call our file. And we're going to have the class header. So it's going to be, in this case, public class rectangle. We can see everything about the fields. So we see that we want two fields called length and width. They'll both be private. They'll both be doubles. Right here, we already see one thing that's missing. So this is something that is not included in our UML class diagram. We don't specify what we would want to initialize these two fields to, if anything at all. So while the UML class diagram is going to give you most of the information that you need about your class, we're going to see certain things that are missing from it. So that's going to be one of them. We don't necessarily know what we want to initialize these fields to just based on this diagram. Additionally, for our methods, we could see all of the stuff that we're going to need for the header of our methods. So we see the name, we see that it's going to have public access, we can see that it's going to be the return type, either void or double in this case. And we can also see all of the parameters we're going to need for it, which includes things like the name and data type of those parameters. But the one major thing that we're missing here is that we don't say what these methods should actually do. So we don't say anything about the body of these methods. And so some additional things that you'll have to include when you're going through this design process on top of this class diagram, you need to be able to answer questions like what should you initialize your fields to and what should your methods do. So there's going to be some additional information you have to consider on top of this. So while the UML class diagram does give you a lot of information about your classes, do keep in mind that it is not a complete picture of what these classes are meant to do. So At this point, this is going to wrap up everything for the UML class diagram. This will kind of conclude the setup for this first simple class where we're building this rectangle. In the next video, what we're going to start taking a look at is going to be adding on an additional method for this now, where we're going to start taking a closer look at that constructor method. So we'll do that in the next video.